Hello, everyone, and welcome to JSA TV and JSA Europe, the newsroom for telecom and data center professionals across the continent. I'm João Marques Lima, and on behalf of the team here at JSA, thank you for tuning in to the third and final part of our end of the year special broadcasting series. Today, we will explore how private equity-backed platforms, Greenfield and Brownfield developments, real estate and M&A will shape Europe's digital infrastructure deployments in 2024. And we will also delve into how the demand for AI could flip the tables on investment portfolios. But with that out of the way, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you our exceptional executive lineup, which includes Siko Buzma, Managing Director for TMT EMEA at Embark, Sebastian Duley, Senior Fund Manager for Principal Asset Management, and Dr. Atif Ansar, Executive Chairman for Foresight Works. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. Before we jump into this very hot topic, which is AI and investment and what's going to happen in 2024, because every year we like a good prediction, let's just do a very quick around the clock kind of 30-second elevator pitch so you can explain what you do and what the business does as well. So maybe I'll start with you, Sebastian, going from top to bottom.
Sure. So I'm at Principal Asset Management. We're a sort of global investment company and have around 100 billion in investments in real estate. I'm part of the data center team. So we've got a team investing in the US and more recently in Europe. We've done around 2.75 billion of equity committed to data centers over the last few years and over 1 billion in debt. And we're sort of continuing to build out our platform.
Small amounts. Atif.
Thank you, João. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Atif Ansar. I wear two hats. I'm an academic at the University of Oxford, focusing on major and mega projects. And I co-founded Foresight Works about 5 years ago. We are an AI company that supports projects in their construction phase to get built on time. And I'll look forward to telling you more about that. We specifically work a lot with digital infrastructure, so both data centers as well as semiconductor fabs.
It is very interesting, especially with the mega side of things, where things are going. It's quite interesting to hear your perspective on the market, what will have to actually change to deliver those mega projects. And Siko, Embark, big name. We know you're pretty much everywhere and everywhere.
Thanks. So, Siko Boomsma, I'm an MD in ING's TMT team. Within TMT, we focus on digital infrastructure, which is fiber, data centers, mobile towers, and satellites. I focus on the data center side of things. We have a very wide geographic mandate. So I cover wider EMEA. We have a team in New York and a team in Singapore that can service our clients. We can do various structures on a senior debt basis, ranging from single tenant Greenfield to multi-tenant projects to portfolio-based financing structures. What we try to do is support our clients when they start with an idea and work together to bring that idea to fruition.
Interesting. I mean, bringing ideas to fruition, it's what this industry is all about, both for the industry and for the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is built on what this industry does with all these real estates being deployed across the continents. I guess the question in order really is, what do you think will be the main trends around investment next year? And maybe we can also push more the private equity button here, because that's kind of the buzzword everyone has at the moment. So, I mean, who wants to start talking about what the trend for 2024 will be? Do you want to go around the clock? Maybe Sebastian, you want to start?
Sure. So as you said at the beginning, I think AI is a very big buzzword at the moment. I know you say you wanted to focus on private equity. I look at things much more from a real estate perspective, so I think I'll stick on that. In Europe, we've been, well, from our perspective, we've finally fully raised our dedicated fund. So our focus is on sort of executing our business plan around that, which is aggregating together a portfolio of standing assets. And I think there is sort of changes coming through when we look at that from an AI perspective, especially when we look at where that demand is going to go. I think, to be perfectly honest, not many people seem to have a very clear answer to that. There's a lot of different theories going around, but what is clear is it's not so location sensitive as, say, cloud deployments. You don't need to be in the availability zones. There's a lot of talk about the Nordics coming up in popularity, although whilst there's a lot of power generation there, could you end up compromising some of the sort of power infrastructure with 250 megawatt schemes that are supposedly coming to fruition up there or being planned up there. But again, that leads to, from our perspective, maybe some of the more sort of network dense connectivity sites in the Nordics could become very interesting to look into. Just as an example, I think whilst AI is a big buzzword, it's definitely not the only trend that's going on. I think we're still seeing strong growth coming through on the cloud side. That's more of a focus for our US team. We've been sort of, partnering with a lot of different operators, sort of in joint venture, and we're continuing to roll that out. At the moment, we are looking to pull together around sort of $3 to $4 billion program to support the existing portfolio who's just suddenly had so much demand come through from the cloud sort of hyperscaler type groups that they've had to front load a lot of their capex that they weren't expecting to originally, and so that's really sort of drawn a huge amount of extra capital in there. And in Europe, I think the demand hasn't quite come through, but we still see the edge stay as being a very interesting layer in the go forwards. And especially again, AI, I think, will indirectly impact the demand for that as models become trained out, apps get built, so they can really run on that, and then how is that going to be integrated into sort of individuals' work life and personal life as well. So I think AI is definitely the buzzword, but from our perspective, it's not the only interesting thing around.
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned edge computing, that is very intrinsically connected to AI and what the objectives are. But then the question still comes down to what is edge computing, and I don't think we want to get into that discussion today because otherwise we'll be here just talking about what edge computing. But that is interesting. And you mentioned the Nordics, and we'll go into locations a bit further down the discussion. But the Nordics are really coming through a second wave now. We've seen the first wave in the mid-2010s. But now it's starting all over again, and we do have some rumors of projects with 1 gigawatt, 2 gigawatt campuses, which, I mean, we'll see if they come to fruition or not. But that's just ginormous amounts of power needed to do that. And I guess the geographical spread of these facilities, as you were mentioning, is shifting. The ideas are shifting on how we're going to build all this and disperse the infrastructure. But Atif, on to you. What do you envision?
So let's look at some data from the US, and I think European data kind of mirrors that as well. So just in terms of Greenfield, new projects being built, we were building under 500 megawatts worth of data centers in the US in 2020. Now numbers vary, but depending on the numbers you look at, anywhere between 3,500 to 5,000 megawatts worth of data centers are under construction in the US as we speak. And again, depending on the estimates, because the numbers don't break down that easily, at between 1,200 to 1,800 megawatts of those are AI data centers, and the remaining are sort of hyperscale and colo data centers. So I think kind of going back to your question about what are the trends, the first trend is hypergrowth, particularly for digital infrastructure. So that's not just data centers, the fiber that goes along with it. And if you sort of cast your net more broadly with the semiconductor fabs and semiconductor plays as well, ultimately these data centers have to run on chips. So there's just a lot going on in this space altogether. Now, your second part of your question, John, was what's the role of private equity here? If you think about, on average, per megawatt installed capacity per data center is around $10 million or euros, however you want to look at it. So with 5,000 megawatts being built, that's a $50 billion financing requirement. It's just staggering. And private equity has a massive role to play in this. So funds like Digital Bridge or, a variety of them have taken big bets, almost specialized digital infrastructure funds out there, like Devonshire, Armour, Fidelity, etc. And I think part of that is private equity can only really take on so much of that portion. So even with lots of leverage, I think both banks and private equity funds would be plenty busy trying to finance this wave.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and although those numbers that you mentioned, they are huge compared to what we were talking about 5-8 years ago, where 100 million, 200 million was a huge amount. If anyone touched the 1 billion, it was headline news all over the world. Those numbers are quite interesting. And I mean, Digital Bridge predicts $1.2 trillion of investment into data centers alone over the next 5-7 years, something like that. It's potentially going to get over that anyway, because And now the beauty of this industry is that all the predictions that we make, they're always wrong because it's always more than what we predict it will be. It's wrong in a good way because it's always more. But Siko.
It's interesting, to hear what's being said in relation to the growth profile, right? When we started looking at this as an asset class, that was back in 2006-7. 100 kilowatt order profile was still something that was a significant order profile, and you were putting your financial models together on the back of multiple of those contracts. Now people are mentioning megawatts like the kilowatts back then. And I think that's a reflection of how this industry has grown. What you see is the underlying fundamentals, they're still strong, right? You see enterprises that are still looking to decrease their total cost of IT expenditure, doing their cloud-based shifts. I think they're becoming more proficient in selecting what type of cloud solution they want to have, be it private cloud or public cloud or a hybrid cloud solution. The development of the telecommunication networks is a very strong driver as well, right? Is that what you see now with certain operators that are actively offering data center to data center fiber connectivity, and creating that ecosystem allows the data center assets to deal with this compute, this storage, and this communication flow. And I think that as a consumer, both on the enterprise as well as on the residential side, we see that there is a tremendous evolution in terms of how we use content and how we use applications. So where in the past we were waiting a bit for mediocre content, now everything has to be content rich in real time. Right, that is a very significant shift that we see in the market, and that has its implication from a demand driver perspective. Underlying that, we see that the hyperscaler demand profile is continuing. As Atif said, a few years ago, it was in the US 500 megawatts. Now we're 5,000 megawatts. Is a tenfold increase, and we see that as well in the amount of transaction flow that we have to deal with within our team. And especially if you look at hyperscaler strategies, right, we see so much evolution there, which I think is a reflection of how this market as an asset class is developing. Right, we see them shifting from their initial tier 1 location into tier 2, 3, and 4 location. We see, I don't want to mention edge, but we actually see cloud out movements. We also see enterprise in movements where enterprises want to have their presence on a local basis, but they want to have their compute on a let's say, centralized basis. And that already in itself is a significant growth profile. But if you augment that with things that are happening with AI, the hyperscalers need to invest very, very significantly in order to do all the machine learning. So, with all that, we expect that there is going to be a tremendous wall of capital that is going to be required. Unfortunately, there's a lot of banks and funds and institutional lenders out there that want to support that, along with the traditional infrastructure-based private equity players that actually see this as a very promising asset class.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a few things I want to follow up on there. I'll do a very quick question because actually you mentioned that you're seeing this on your side as well in terms of deal overflow. So actually, very quick sideline question: how are you guys managing within your own teams to answer the demands when it comes to actually dealing with the deal overflow? Like how are you dealing with all these demands, with the deals coming through, with all the due diligence? Are you finding the right talent? Are you struggling to find talent to work within your businesses on the back of all this rush of business coming in? Again, it's a good problem to have, but it's important.
Exactly.
Very quick one, just on the sidelines.
Yeah, we work hard. Yeah,
20 hours a day. You don't stop.
No, kidding aside, what we have done is basically we started looking at this as an asset class very, very early on. And I think that allowed us also to work with the juniors and the mediors in our team to actually touch a data center transaction very early on. So it's a point of pride for me that everybody within our team speaks data center for a bit, and that already saves a lot, right? If you, let's say, have the basic tenets of financial structuring, the basic tenets of how a data center works, if you know how to do a contractual review, you can do your instructions towards legal counsel in the right way, towards technical advisors in the right way. It just saves a lot of work if you have trained your team correctly. But yeah, it's quite a lot of work right now.
Okay. Atif, Sebastian, do you want to add something around building up the teams? Because everyone is building, so that's the common ground here.
So look, just to come in here very briefly, so I'll come in from an execution perspective. So, those megawatts of data centers have to be built by a team of some kind. And with between 7 to 10x growth over last 4 years, supply chains are not 7 or 10x bigger or better. If anything, they are worse off because of COVID in between. And so I think what we are seeing as well is there's serious capacity constraints in the execution side of the industry, and a metric for that is simply time delays. So projects have in general issues with time overruns, but partly owing to really lethal cocktail of COVID, geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions. Those lead times are prolonging, and overall kind of estimation error between when people want to build those data centers and where they actually get built is getting harder. I think that's also exciting because you can now use AI tools to try and win back some of that productivity. So I do think it's both a push and pull, and certainly for data center industry, because they are so keen on building AI data centers, I think they might as well use them in their own execution phase. So that would be a helpful message for them.
It's the same old story that when a challenge occurs, there's an opportunity to do some things in a different way, in a more efficient way. And I think that's where AI will enable is just becoming more efficient, faster, more efficient. And when you struggle, you always find a solution. And this industry is one of those industries that always does that. And Sebastian, just quickly on that one.
Yeah, I think on the senior end of the team, we started looking really 2019, 2020, and I think we're slightly lucky in that we were able to make a very good hire there before the big rush of a lot of investment firms starting to look at it. And again, having we're working since 2007 in the US and having good knowledge there helped a lot. On the junior end, I think exactly the same as what Siko said. Every time we go out for a site visit, we try to make sure that the analysts can come along, have a look around, and really get to understand the asset class better. Ultimately, for what we do, we don't need a massive team. We're quite targeted, and we can have a smaller team as a result of that.
Yeah, there's nothing better than boots on the ground to actually see the state. Another side question. I'll probably get back on the horse after this one. Are we worried about the macroeconomic environment across the world and how they might impact the European data center market next year? Is that an issue for concern, or is it just a passing by feeling that the industry will navigate?
I can jump in maybe. I think it's obviously a concern, especially given a lot of the geopolitical tension that's going on. But I think the demand driver behind data centers is something that we think can withstand quite a lot. And to be honest, I think a lot of operators are being slightly more squeezed at the moment with debt costs coming up, with inflation in construction costs over the last few years. But from our perspective, that adds and leads to a lot of opportunity. People are really looking at their capital stack. It's not as simple as equity from a private equity platform and then a loan from ING in order to be able to get the numbers to work. People are now starting to look at joint ventures. How can they be creative and bring in additional capital? So I think it's leading to a lot of opportunity for us.
Yeah, it is very interesting because actually the West, so Europe, North America, was very ahead of this whole construction. But when you look at Asia, it's all being done through joint ventures. So now it seems like we're actually taking a bit of the idea of joint ventures from Asia and bring them into Europe and in some way in the US as well. So it's very interesting how the market is shifting. I'll go around again. So Atif, what's your macroeconomic view?
I'm bullish. I think looking at inflation numbers coming out of the US, employment numbers, again, I think US is in better, more robust shape than European continent as a whole, at least just the way I assess it at the moment. So I don't I mean, it's impossible to predict the future, but I don't think the macroeconomic headwinds are the key constraint. The constraint, in my view, is a bit more micro, which is power constraints, chip constraints, people constraints. Just I think those are bigger worries in my mind for the data center industry, rather than a sharp, demand just disappearing. And we see that in the prices. Prices of data center services have doubled in the last 3 months. So that all of that is pointing to supply constraint. So I think for the next 12 to 18 months, supply just has to catch up with demand. What happens after that? No one can really know.
We don't dare trying to guess on that front.
Listen, I agree with that. I agree with that. The thing is, does a behavioral pattern change if there is a geopolitical thing happening? I don't believe that people will stop using the Azure platform if there is something going on in the region, right? I think geopolitical tension leads to increased caution. And I believe that leads to some additional vetting of business plans in a way that they're able to withstand a certain, systemic geopolitical shock. But that all being said, we see that the large hyperscalers are rolling out their networks across various markets, and that is still ongoing. That is not stopping. And clearly, there are, as Atif referred to earlier, there are some regional elements that need to be taken into consideration. Can you have sustainable growth in a country such as, Ireland or in the Frankfurt area, right? And we still see there that even though there might be certain, political aspects, that the industry, it's an engineer-led, creative, fast-thinking industry, is still able to come up with solutions, right? Take Frankfurt as an example. The market has been very much over-focused on the definition of the size of the availability zone in Frankfurt. But what we see now is that availability zone is widening up because the strength of the telco networks allow that. You don't need to be in a specific neighborhood in Frankfurt anymore. You can be in the surrounding area because that's where you still have your land availability and your power availability. We see that operators, in unison in discussions with hyperscalers as well as with large deployment enterprises, they become more tailored towards where the demand needs to be and where the most efficient demand should be. Amsterdam, communication-driven market, we know that in the vicinity of Amsterdam, there are certain locations where you can do more, let's say, latency insensitive compute and storage. That's how the market is evolving as well.
No, I totally agree with you with what everyone said, really. And I do like the view of moving the conversation from macroeconomics to microeconomics, macro to micro. Sorry, I got my wording wrong there. I mean, it's a fascinating market that adapts very quickly. The problem is when policy gets in the way, and I guess that's where the industry needs to become a little bit better, get a seat at the table more early on, as opposed to waiting to see what's going to happen. And we've seen Germany now rolling out probably the most stringent sustainability-linked legislation towards data centers, and that's just going to be rolled out to other countries. So there's no way around it. We know what's going to happen. So it's a matter like, are people preparing for that? So that's where we need to move on now. It's not try to cry over spilled milk, as we say back home. It's just acting on it and then building the platform for what's coming next. But all right, so let's bring the conversation back to the original plan. So let's talk a bit about just brownfield versus greenfield development. Even yesterday, I was talking to a CEO whose strategy is to acquire businesses and start on the brownfield side, and then they will expand the facilities that they are acquiring, and then eventually they will move into greenfield once the books allow. What are you guys seeing in terms of brownfield versus greenfield? What strategies are being followed? Is this a common practice, the one I just described, for example? Just give us your view of what's happening and how they can change, shift, stagnate next year. The first one that says something goes first.
Look, I'm happy. I'm in this one, partly because I track greenfield projects, right? So I don't have a strong view on the brownfield side of things. So I'll defer to colleagues on to discuss Brownfield. I think on Greenfield, one of the interesting things that we're seeing, particularly again with data centers, is this issue of time delays. So if you look at the overall risk profile, there are three things you're playing with: your potential revenue that you're going to get once you lease up the whole property, the cost you're going to invest in the capex, and the time it's going to take you. Incidentally, cost overruns, which are typically a very big issue in the execution phase for new projects, is less of a problem for data centers. On average, they have relatively low cost overruns, partly because of very big contingencies, but time overruns is a big issue. So on average, we built the world's largest data set of its kind on data centers. We're seeing 34% average delays. So roughly speaking, a 2-year project becomes a 3-year project. Up until now, the hyperscalers have taken a relatively benign view. So they sort of talk a tough talk around penalties, but when the colo developers have been unable to meet those deadlines, they've ended up with negotiated settlements, and those penalties haven't been extracted. I think that patience is running out. So we're going to see a lot more of these penalties being extracted and a lot more rankling over ready for service dates. And partly because the demand imperative is so strong that there isn't that much of a leeway there. So I think from that perspective, just without knowing too much about Brownfield myself and just looking at Greenfield, many private equity investors may take the view that where the demand profile is already known, they may get away with it. But I think my bigger message to the audience would be, take the execution risk, whether it's Greenfield or Brownfield, extremely seriously. Oftentimes people become fixated with Excel spreadsheets at the final investment decision, and don't bake in any risk for what happens if I'm 1/3 overrun and my customer actually extracts the penalties. Suddenly the private equity IRR is going to disappear.
Interesting point here. Sebastian?
I think it's also a question of span of control. As hyperscalers, you only have a team that is a certain size, right? And you are dealing with the demand profile for both AI as well as the cloud-based business, where you have a team that is working across multiple projects, right? And they need to retain a specific amount of control. If you're working on 1-2 projects, you can still get internal resources to help out in order to meet the RFS. If you manage 20 projects, you need to be a little bit more stringent, and you need to hold the project company responsible for the agreements that have been made. I think everybody wants to be pragmatic in this industry, and they also acknowledge that they need to make it work, right? Because they also need to have a 10 or 15-year productive relationship with the project company. But if it really becomes an issue, then at a certain point in time, you'll see that these things start popping up, as in payment RFS penalties being invoked, or additional payment holidays starting after project commissioning. Now we look a lot at brownfield situations, and we support operators that have landed in let's say the tier 1 markets and have managed to secure good location for certain activities, certain compute, mission critical, latency sensitive compute and communication data center functionality. Those locations, they very quickly transform from a greenfield situation into a brownfield situation, and we have seen over the course of 6-7 years in project 1 evolving into project 6, because that order profile is just continuing. And what you see there is that with such a demand profile and with such a multiplication of projects, this is great for the investors because they do have some scale advantages. So it has some pretty beneficial effect on their IRR and investment strategy. Now, the hyperscalers also know that, and with the environment changing, with weighted average cost of debt increasing, and this depressed supply chain, they want to be pragmatic, but they also know that if they have a repeat order profile in brownfield, that as the Roman says, "Pacta sunt servanda," agreements are there to be respected.
Interesting. And Sebastian, any thoughts to add? I know it's more on the real estate side, but All right, we lost Sebastian there for a second. No, as you guys were actually talking, I was thinking, because oh, there you are. I was saying if you've got any thoughts to add. I know it's more of a real estate kind of question, but maybe you have just one or two things to add.
On the Brownfield versus Greenfield.
Yeah.
I think, apologies for dropping off. It's
No,
not quite so stable. I think, from our perspective, we definitely have a preference for Brownfield. And sort of, I think you do get more challenges and you do have risks of sort of overruns from sort of taking on existing and the challenge of not everything is exactly how you expect, whereas with Greenfield it's a little bit more of a clean slate. Numerous reasons. I think Brownfield is preferred, and I think coming forwards is sustainability as well. I mean, just looking at sort of the ground of a site, some people are saying up to 50% of carbon created or embodied during a development process is within, and especially somewhere like the Netherlands, where a lot of regions need a lot of piling due to the ground quality. A lot of the embodied carbon goes into just the concrete base, and so if you're able to sort of continue using what's already there, then that's got to have a benefit. And whilst embodied carbon is not overly tracked at the moment, down the line, I think that's going to become more important. So again,
it's about like the life cycle and the circular economy around the entire project as well, which is why the attention is shifting. But as you were all talking, I was actually remembering after COVID, the few months after COVID kind of ended, there was a lot of discussion around, do we have oversupply? Did we build too much? Was Microsoft too rushed to put those 100 megawatts out? And the truth is, it's not. I mean, here we are just a year and a half later, and we're talking about we don't even have enough as it is, let alone talk about oversupply. That's how fast the market changes. I'm actually going to bring one question, because we do have a question from the audience, and I think it's quite a good point around modularization, building modular units within the data center. So what's your view on using modularity to build the facilities, and how can it kind of help with the 30% average delays in delivery of these projects? Are we moving towards that side of things in a wider picture, or is this for very specific?
Conceptually, modularization is a phenomenal idea. And wherever we've seen industries modularize, we see those overruns come right down, and in fact, the absolute cost curves come right down. So, solar, wind, onshore wind doesn't have cost overruns or time overruns. Same with solar, etc. So I think in theory, really good ideas. For some reason, I personally haven't come across lots of scalable deployments of modularization for data centers. So I'd be curious to be educated here by the audience about projects that do use a modular approach, and I have managed to actually replicate that. There's obviously always edge kind of case studies that people talk about, but it seems to me more of a marketing ploy than reality. Although there's really, in my view, no barrier to it. We've seen, for example, companies like DuPont do this for chemical plants, achieve very high degree of modularization, very similar complexity of electromechanical systems. So it's doable, but I'd love to learn more about who's actually doing it and doing it at scale, and it's not like a one-off project, but something repeatable.
I think that is exactly in line with how we see it. We have seen modularization in the industry, and it's just like edge. It's an often used concept. If you look at all the info memos that we have, if you just would do a search function, there's always modularization in there. The fact of the matter is, we haven't seen it yet in scale, in large deployments, and the reason is for that is twofold. I think there is a very vast difference between standardization that we have seen initiated back when we were talking about the Yahoo chicken coop design and what Google has been doing versus modularization. That's one. And the second thing is there are specific business models where modularization is just not useful. If you have a single tenant data center with an early install profile, there is no rationale to do modularization. So it's also applicable to specific business models as well.
Sebastian?
We've seen it, sort of the blade room technology and everything like that rolled out once on an investment we were considering. And I think from that perspective, again, it's definitely on the smaller scale compared with sort of the big hyperscale rollouts. I mean, it is fantastic from an IRR perspective. Your risk management is a lot easier. You know, you know what the time will be before you need to roll it out, and you can go up in 600 kilowatt chunks. So the upfront investment and the potential to invest something and then have it wiltering away for a while before actually coming into use is much less. So a brilliant idea, but yeah, at scale, much trickier.
Yeah. And John, one last thing I might add here is it could be just that this is a concept that's in need of an entrepreneur. So like somebody who's able to build a business out of it. So I think fundamentally a sound concept, but it probably needs that Tesla moment where somebody does the obvious and makes a success out of it, and navigates all the treacheries that go along with a new idea like that.
Yeah, it reminds me of when Cole Crawford from Vaporario created the I can't remember if it's called the chamber. It's a silly. I can't remember if the name is actually the chamber now, but he created it and they kind of transformed the whole edge computing. I mean, it transformed the idea of edge computing. It transformed what we called edge. And when you see the machine, you're like, all right, now I understand what edge is. And I remember seeing it the first time. So it probably needs something like that, someone like that to come up and create something new. But I think we've seen a bit of modularization in some US markets, but mostly I think you see it more within emerging markets. So the Southern Hemisphere, where you're building less, you're building smaller amounts, and then it's just easier to probably test it versus bigger markets like Europe. I know you're kind of getting to the last 10 minutes now, so I'm going to throw, of course, the geographic question. Which is what location are we going to be looking out for next year in terms of investment? Because I mean, Sebastian already mentioned the Nordics, but what locations are we going to be seeing popping up even more next year and beyond the tier 1 cities? Because we kind of know what's happening there. But what's the new up and coming? And I'll throw in the M&A angle at it as well. Where we're going to see more M&A, geographically speaking. And I know you've got to tread that one carefully because I'm sure there's NDAs, but I'll leave that to you.
Listen, I think what we're going to see is that shift to the tier 3, tier 4 markets. I think that's going to be very relevant. And what we see there is the growth profile of hyperscalers that is actually going to materialize. We saw that case very clearly when we did the financing for a company called Atlas Edge, that was able to bridge the gap between what the hyperscaler demand is and how much capacity they can offer in tier 3, tier 4 markets. If you look at a hyperscaler team, they need to go to their capital committees as well, right? Their capital allocation committees. You can easily request 50 megawatts in Frankfurt, but do 10 megawatts in the Munich area or Hamburg area. It's a different story. So those type of operators that are able to bridge the gap between smaller projects but still accommodating that growth profile there, I think are the winners in the industry in that respect. What we see as well is significant profile in the Middle East. There is a lot of enterprise demand there that is not being covered yet by cloud service providers. I think that we'll see more emphasis on, as I said, the Nordics. We see high density compute, high performance compute applications, and we see enterprises becoming more finessed in how they want to run their IT infrastructure, right? And we have seen early examples of that already with BMW doing their compute in Iceland, and then when the engineers come back, they have the results in Munich. We see that there are more specific IT requirements that are being accommodated by specific data center models, and that's very exciting to see. So it used to be this is the data center sector, and now we see very specific bespoke models that in my view are very exciting.
It's absolutely no longer one size fits all. It has to be bespoke to the industry and the application you're trying to
Exactly.
drive the demand for.
Yeah.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I agree with Sika. I think whilst we've still got to focus on, we want to have a base in the flat markets, but our focus is, and it always has been, very much more on those secondary markets. I'm glad you brought up Atlas Edge. They're a tenant of ours in our Barcelona facility. And I think their approach to things is fantastic in terms of looking at those markets where there is that undersupply. There's the fundamental reasons for data centers to be there. It won't be a 80 megawatt hyperscale, but it will be there. There is definitely a requirement, and I think that's a lot of where our focus is, and on those sort of connection points between various markets as well, when there's more subsea fiber, is interesting. I don't think we're going to be going too far off the beaten path in terms of trying to develop something sort of in the back end of say the Nordics or something like that. But again, focusing on those major cities where there is that connectivity coming through and where we do see demand building out, I think is going to be a lot of interest for us.
Yeah, so Southern Europe is definitely an exciting place to look at with the different use cases. And then Atif?
So look, I think much like Siko and Sebastian, this is a rising tide. So rising tide lifts all boats. And I was at a data center conference in Zurich last week, and I was amused to, they kept referring to Switzerland as an emerging market, because obviously we're talking about data center as an emerging market. So I think across Europe, Nordics, of course, but markets like Switzerland, Estonia, you name it. I think, Italy, Milan, the number of data centers being built around Milan airport at the moment. So, I think all of them is a rising tide. But even further afield, you'd be amazed by the number of data centers being built in Jakarta, in Kuala Lumpur, in Mumbai. This is... so I think you ain't seen nothing yet, and as such, from a capital allocation perspective, people need to allocate capital of the area they know about. Now, as a macroeconomic trend, digital infrastructure is here to stay, and if anything, it's sort of just climbing up to a level of maturity now. So it's more about your understanding of the local regulatory market, etc., to make those bets. Whether Jakarta or Mumbai or Zurich, it's that will ultimately drive those dollars.
You ain't seen nothing yet. I like that. I think that kind of actually sums up what's going on in the world. But I think that all ties up very well as well to the earlier point that you guys made around the different types of buildings that are going to need to be built, from the edge building to the mothership data center, some people call it. And that's where then the diversification within the metros will accentuate even more. And that's where the Nordics are coming into their second stage, but it's not going to be a stage where they're going to build small facilities. It's going to be the big beasts. They're going to go into the Nordics because of cooling and cheaper electricity. Then I was going to say as well, it's just a very quick question to end. I don't have $50 billion to give each one of you, like you gave an example early on. But if I gave you $1 billion, where would you go next year? What city, what locality, municipality, something specific? Where would you go to with $1 billion to build something big? You can't be 100 million. You can't do anything with 100 million nowadays. So let's go for 1 billion. Yeah, there is a question. Who wants to? No one wants to throw a name to the table.
Personally,
I would do several strategies. First of all, I think the market is very much focused on hyperscalers, and with a lot of investor demand, you also tend to get a little bit of an overfocus. There is still a very significant enterprise demand profile, and that commands also a different price profile than what the hyperscalers get. So I would put a significant portion in the enterprise demand, because what we see there is that the order profile is going up. We see that the contract tenors are being stretched, and we see that those parties still become very nice return profile for projects. So that's one. Second one is, the tier 3, tier 4 markets. Clearly, we see there are a lot of development. Milan, I think we all see the activity there. But there is a lot of Milans out there across Europe, right? So if you do the math, where is the enterprise, where is the teledensity, and where is the capacity, you know where to invest. So I would put 1/3 of that billion there. And the other 1/3 I would put into, let's say, the long-term next generation type of technologies. Right, there's a lot of things happening in semiconductors. So optoelectronics is a very exciting area. Edge applications. Coal will definitely get part of my investment there. That's how I would split it.
Yeah, there's a few R&D aspects that I would definitely bet some money in as well for the next 30, 40 years, like DNA storage. I think that's going to be quite exciting and very disruptive. Sebastian, where would you go?
It's difficult following Seko on a very good response.
No, yeah, he kind of raised the bar. I just wanted a geography.
I'm slightly biased. We've got our strategy of building out with some focus on the core markets, but acquiring assets across, and I think very much shadows again Seko's first part of his answer. Sort of that enterprise demand in locations which are more sort of secondary and tertiary and third and fourth tier. Struggling with my English, and I think that for us is a very interesting subset of the market that isn't really getting too much of the attention at the moment, and will sort of remain sort of strong from a demand perspective, given the business, the people, the wealth that is existing in a lot of these locations across Europe.
Okay, and Latif, final words?
So I'd certainly give some of it to Seko, because I think his answer is fantastic. But
you got an angel.
Yes, I think if one had that, there's an element. This is a market of immense information barriers. So it's not for the faint-hearted. And if you've not been doing data centers for 10, 15 years, don't just march out with $1 billion. You're very likely to lose it. And if you look at private equity returns, even for private equity funds, it's almost like a venture play in many ways. So some people have made a huge amount of money, but there's also some big losses there as well. So I think from a purely capital allocation perspective, my primary strategy would be passive and go with people like Seko, who, and Sebastian, who know what they're doing and have been doing it, and park the money there. One final thing I would say, there's an element of some venture style investments that are right here, and they're actually not in data centers; they are in power. So in on-site power, in basically allied services. So not sort of the gold rush itself, but selling the Levi's to the people. So I think that would be an area where I'd put some allocation in, is be it on-site LNG or gas or things like that, and things of that nature.
Right. Well, I really loved the 3 answers that you gave, because you actually flipped the question around. Usually people struggle not to say the areas where they're actually going to invest, and then they have to run away from the question. So there was a very good flip on how to answer it. So thank you so much, Atif, Sebastian, and Seko. I found that to be extremely insightful, and we could be here talking for a lot longer, because I know we didn't even get through half of the questions we had lined up for this chat. So thank you so much. And on behalf of the speakers, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, either here on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, or JSA.net. You can also watch our 2 previous roundtables on JSA's LinkedIn and YouTube pages, one discussing the future powerhouses of Europe, data centers 2024, and the other looking at the financial frontier of Europe and unleashing sustainable investments in 2024. With that, we wrap up today's conversation. Look out for the playback of this session coming soon to JSA TV, YouTube, LinkedIn, X, and more. From me and the team at JSA Europe, all that's left to say is to wish everyone a jolly holiday season and a prosperous 2024. See you next year, and as always, happy networking.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
All right.